Okay, we're on Chesam Aleph 28a, and we're toward the bottom of the page.
For the Mishnah?
Before the Mishnah, about 3 lines before the Mishnah. Okay, and the question we were dealing with was vigilantism, right? Taking matters into your own hands.
Oh, yeah.
Toshma, so there's a chiyuv of peah. What is peah? You leave a corner of the field to the poor. So he left one corner and they took a different corner. They're both peah. If you say a person could be a vigilante to sort of prevent damage to himself, why are they both peah? Linka passer, let him take a stick. And stand in the area that in the corner that they're taking from. And why is it peah? They're stealers, they're robbers. So Amarov and Maizev is a peah, Lepochim and Amaiser. We're talking about where the guy sort of consents. He's basically agrees. And when the Brisa says that it becomes peah, what that really means is that it's exempt from Maiser. So normally, if a person collects wheat, he has to take off Meiser. Peah is considered as if he acquired it from Hefker, and he's exempt from Meiser. So therefore, if the guy consents that they take from a different corner, then it's exempt from Meiser. Tanya, like we learned, Hamafker's Kamar v'Hishkim b'Biker u'Batzroi Chayiv Parad b'As Shechol Peah u'Potem and Meiser. If somebody makes his property ownerless, but then goes ahead while it's ownerless and sort of cuts down the whole thing, he basically is chayiv in everything except for peah, because it was ownerless. So in other words, if the poor people are taking from a different corner, and he agrees to that, then they're taking from an ownerless property, and they do not have to pay meiser. They don't have to remove the meiser. Okay. Okay, we're together. Okay, next Gemara is a little bit complicated.
Yeah, but you have an upper English class capacity for understatement. Right? Warning.
Yeah, that's not as hard as some of the other Gemaras, but it's not so easy. I guess before we start, one of the key things.
Screws. It's not as bad as the rack, though.
So let's talk about a couple of things. We started off the Masechta. What was the first things we learned in the Masechta? Arba Avis Nezikin, right? It's the first rules. There's a bunch of rules about the main categories of Nezikin, how we divide it, how we learn them from each other, etc. Okay. In Kate said a regel, we spoke at length about regel and shame specifically. That was in the second parak. This parak, Hamaniach Sakat, talks a lot about bar. Now the truth is, we really started with bar, but we got distracted by being a vigilante, basically. Now we get back into bar. Now we talk about bar. So bar is a pit, right? But we said it's not just a pit. What could also be a bar? You have a dangerous item, right? You have a knife in a public property, it can cause a lot of damage. That's also an example of a bar.
A big stone in the road.
Exactly. So bar doesn't necessarily have to be something that's submerged in the ground. It can be something that sticks out above the ground. Okay. Another very important idea, which we discussed briefly, but we'll discuss at length, is who owns the bar? Who owns the pit? It doesn't make a difference who owns it. What happens if I dig a pit, but then I make it ownerless?
No.
So
you still dug the pit, though.
So we'll discuss a lot of this. What happens if I dug the pit on private property and then I made everything ownerless? Dug it on my own property, then I made my property ownerless, and I made my pit ownerless. All right, this is an extensive discussion we'll have now, and we'll continue to have later. Okay. We'll see why this makes a difference. Nishbra kadib b'shasaramim. He breaks his he was carrying a barrel in public, and the barrel broke. V'huchlak echad b'mayim. And somebody was hit by the water, and maybe his clothing got dirty or something. Shalaka b'charosis, or one of the shards hurt him. Chayev. The guy is chayev. We'll have to see. Did this happen in real time? Did it happen live? In other words, as it broke, the water damaged him, or was there a puddle of water in the public area, and he slipped and tripped over it? Rabbi Yehudah says, Rabbi Yehudah is more specific. If he had intention, chayev. But if he didn't have intention, potter, he's exempt. Okay. Amar Yehudah Amar Rav. So Yehudah says the name of Rav. Lo yishanu elo shetinfu kela v'mayim. This rule is only true if the vessels got dirty from water. Aval hu atzmai potter. But if he tripped over the water, he's exempt. Karka oilam hezikasei, because what actually hurt him was not the water, it was the fact that he tripped over it. So it was the land that hit him. Right? In other words, if he tripped, the item that makes you trip is not the source of the item that makes you trip is not the source of the pain. Right? It's the ground that's the source of the pain, and he doesn't own the ground. Okay. When I said this in front of Shmuel, okay. Let me just add one more thing when we talk about Bur. Bur is exempt from damages to kalim, to vessels. So another thing we have to see. Rav here just spoke about a vessel. It's clear that Rav is not learning this is Bur. Because if it was a Bur is exempt from paying for vessels. Okay. When I said this in front of Shmuel, Amrli says, Michli, Avni Tzakino Masai. Guy had a rock on top of a knife with a heavy item on top to make sure it doesn't blow away. And then what happened was it did blow away. And it landed in the public area and people got hurt. Okay. How do we know that Avni Tzakino Masai pays for damages? It's learned from the concept of Bur. 1 second. The kulan and ikara behen sharvle adam chamor v'lekelam. One second. Okay. Now, in other words, this stone that fell into the public area. How do we know you're chayev? Bur, from the laws of Bur. The kulan and ikara behen, with regard to every Bur, the law is sharav le'adam chamar v'lekelam. It says that the Torah says it damages a ox or a donkey, an ox and not a person, a donkey and not vessels. Now, with regard to a person, if a person is killed in a pit by falling into it, the owner is exempt. Avlinyan is zokin with regard to damages. Adam chayev v'kelam p'turin. You'd be chayev on the damages of a person, but exempt on the damages of vessels. Okay, so Shmuel is effectively asking Rav, you're telling me that the vessels got ruined in the water. 1 second, vessels are exempt from bar. You should not pay anything for vessels. It must be that the person himself got damaged, not the vessels. So the Gemara says, so here we get right onto the subject. Rav says, no. When is something a bar? When you make it ownerless. But if you own a bar, you're chayav for a different reason. Sorry?
You said there was a death, resulted in death.
No, if it results in the death of a human being, you're exempt. The owner of the pit is exempt from payment. But if it damages a human being, he's chayav. But if it damages a vessel, you're exempt. If you hurt or kill a donkey or an ox or any other animal, chayav.
But if you kill a person,
exempt. And if you shatter vessels, the same thing. So Shmuel basically is telling Rav, how can you say that Rav said that he's chayav when the vessel got damaged? Why are vessels damaged? Why are you chayav for vessels being damaged if it's bar? Okay. So Mara says, Rav okay, so Rav says very important. This is true that something is considered a bar when you make it ownerless. When you own a bar, then you own it. And owning it, it's like your ox. It's a stationary ox. Right? In other words, it's your money. You're chayav even on vessels. The only time you're chayav on bar and exempt from vessels is when you don't own it. Okay. And according to Rav, the key idea of bar is that you're sort of responsible for that which isn't yours. If it's yours, it's not bar, it's shar. It's it's an inanimate ox. Right? It's as if it was your ox. Okay, so you can imagine Masa Rav Ashi wasn't too thrilled with that. V'nofal shama shor chamor, shor v'le adam chamor v'le kelim. Mikana amru nofal toicha shor v'kelov. If you have a ox and the ox is wearing, I guess, the vessels, pack animal, v'nishdabru, and the vessels broke, chamor v'kelov and iskaru, and the donkey has these sort of sacks, and the sacks ripped open. Chayav al behema, you're liable for the animal. Potter al kelim, you're exempt from the vessels. Halamaza daima, what's this comparable to? This is like a stone, a rock, and I'm sorry, a stone, a knife, and a heavy item on top. That you put down in a public area, the hiziko, and it did damage. Okay, now let's be very clear about this. Does the Torah talk about a rock, a stone, a knife, and a heavy item? No. Torah talks about a bar. So the terminology here, the Gemara's first issue, is a little bit backwards. You say that you talk about an example the Torah is referring to, a pit. And you say, what's that similar to? It's similar to a rock, a knife, and a heavy thing. It's the opposite. A rock and a knife and a heavy thing are comparable to a pit, not the other way. The pit is the key idea. That's the Torah refers to. Okay, 1 second. The question is not what is it comparable to. It is what the Torah refers to. It's what is comparable to it. Okay, Elamai says you're right. Okay, so in other words, if you put this, you put a rock and a knife and a heavy thing on your roof, and it falls down, and it does damage, that is like a pit. Make sense?
No, but I understand it.
No, it's the same principles.
Yeah, okay.
The same.
Right. No, I get it. No, I get it.
Okay.
It's hard to understand these concepts about death, not.
Oh yeah.
Not liable.
So okay. Yeah, I have a minute. In my opinion, the key concept of bar is that you're not chayav on bar. Period. You should not. Logically, you should not be liable for a pit. The reason is because you did not damage anything. You have it's not yours. It has nothing to do with you. What makes it yours? Because I dug it, it becomes mine. Yeah. It's public property.
Public property, right?
So the public has to fill in the pits.
You own it. I mean, you're still responsible. If you dug it, someone falls in, it's on you.
So I think you're right. I think the key idea here of bar is that the Torah makes something that isn't yours as if it is yours. And that's unusual. We said the most logical nezik is adam, assault, battery. And then adam amazik, the person that does damage, even if it's not assault. And afterwards, you're sure, it's your ox, okay, but the pit, it's not my pit. The answer is that we make believe it's as if it's your pit. You dug it, you're responsible. What does that mean? It means that even though it's not yours and you shouldn't be liable because it has nothing to do with you, not only that, you didn't, your thing, even if you'll say it's your thing, it still didn't do any damage, right? It was the victim's fault. The victim damaged himself. The pit is a passive. It doesn't make it doesn't even make sense. A passive damager, like what does that mean? That means the victim damaged themselves. Right. You can't, if you're passive, you necessarily cannot be a damager. So therefore, in my personal opinion, a bar is something that in truth you should not be chayav on at all. The fact that you're chayav on bar is itself a new idea. There's a tremendous amount of novelty to something that you had no responsibility for and doesn't even belong to you. You didn't do any damage. Okay, fine. So now the Torah says, okay, you're chayav on a bar because you dug it, we pretend as if it's yours. And moreover, because you're responsible for it, we pretend as if you're the damager, which doesn't make any sense because you can't damage something if you're passive. It's the victim that damaged themselves. No, you're responsible because you should have watched it. You should have watched it so you're responsible for the damage that occurs in it, even though it's not your damages. Fine. Okay. But once you have all these reasons not to pay, then you can understand why in certain scenarios you shouldn't be paying. Especially a person who falls in, he should have realized. Vessels that fall in, like they're not Oompa Loompas, how they get in, right? Right. They dance inside. No, these things are inanimate objects. How can it be that again, fundamentally, bor is that you're responsible for somebody else hurting themselves. Now, how does that make sense in the context of a vessel? How does a vessel hurt itself? It's a Roomba or something. I guess it drove right in. Even the Roomba is supposed to have a sensor. It's not supposed to run over steps. I don't know if the sensor works, but at least it's supposed to work. It doesn't. There's no reason why I should be chayav on something that that can't move, that damages, that my property gets damaged by something that can't move either. The answer is that somebody brought it into the pit, right? Because there's no other way for a vessel to get into a pit. So somebody brought it into a pit. Well, that's somebody's responsibility. It's bad enough that you say I'm liable for the animal that brought it in. I should be liable for the vessels too. That's a step. It's even a further step. Okay, I hope this makes sense. This is my own theories. Okay, so I don't take any responsibility for them. Yeah, although I won't watch it, so maybe all the damage. Who knows? Okay, okay. Therefore, if a guy has a jug and it falls over a rock in the street, chayav. 1 second. Yeah. If his stone if my jug falls over a stone, then the owner of the stone is chayav. Now this you might imagine is exactly opposite to what we said. I understand that is kalim. That's two vessels bumped into each other. In other words, somebody pushed one vessel into another, into a bar, effectively, and the guy is chayav on the vessel. What does that mean? That's self-contradictory, right? You understand the problem here. So the Gemara says, Reish Kashla Rav, Seif Kashla Shmuel. The first part of the brisa is difficult to Rav. Why? Because Abdi Sakinim Masai, the rock and the knife and the heavy thing, those obviously are owned by somebody. They were on a roof, I owned them. Then they flew off the roof and they did damage. That means that's a bar that's owned by somebody. And we say that's a bar, meaning it's exempt from vessels. That's a question in Rav. But then we say, oh, guess what? You're also chayav on vessels. That's a question on Shmuel. Okay, 1 second. So the Gemara says it's not really a question of Rav and Shmuel. The Bryce itself is fundamentally contradictory. It says that Adam Sakinim Asoy is chayav like a bar, which means you're exempt from vessels, and then you say you're chayav on vessels. Like, which one is it? Is it a bar or is it not a bar? You want to say that your own stumbling block, the stumbling block that you own in a public area, is not a bar. Instead, it's like an inanimate char. Fine, but then don't compare it to bar. And if you are comparing it to bar, why are you chayav in vessels? The price is contradictory. Rav Mataretz to me, Shmuel Mataretz to me. Rav and Shmuel will each answer according to their own opinion. Rav Mataretz to me b'med dvarim murim kishehefkiron. Rav explains according to his own reasoning. Okay, so in other words, Rav says that Adam Zakinim Asai is like a bar. When kishehefkiron, when you made the rock and the stone and the knife ownerless, and the heavy thing on top. Avaloyev kiran, but if it was not ownerless, so then it's not a bar. And then what? Then chayav. Then you're chayav on the vessel that got damaged. So you have avos kinim asai. If you made it hefker, then it's ownerless. I'm sorry. If you made it hefker, it's a bar, and you're exempt from vessels, from kalim. If, however, you did not make it ownerless, then according to Rav, you're chayav on the vessels, and that makes sense.
Make it ownerless retroactively?
No, that would give a lot of exemptions. But Shmuel, can you make your own animal ownerless retroactively? Shmuel Mataretz Tamei. Shmuel gives his own reasoning. Now that you're saying that the stone and the knife are like your pit. Rabbi Yehudah de Mechayev on this Kelim Bebor lefichatichet tzachos of Evan Chayev. So according to Shmuel, basically the Bryce is a machlokes. The Bryce basically says there's a debate here about Kelim and a bar. Rabbi Yehudah says Chayev, and according to that opinion, be Chayev of the Sakinim Asay as well. Amar Belozer. Belozer says Lo Shanu El Shenitkal beEvan v'Noshef beEvan. Rabbi Elazar says this is only true if you tripped over the rock and you got hurt by the rock. But if you tripped on the ground and you fell onto the rock, potter, you're exempt. Kaman, whose opinion is this like? Deloitte Reb Nosson. Okay, so in other words, we'll explain in a moment. In other words, you need to be both the tripping and the damage has to happen by the rock. If you trip over something else and then you bump into the rock, it's not the rock's fault that you tripped. Okay, not like Reb Nosson. What's the opinion of Reb Nosson? Reb Nosson has we spoke of Reb Nosson in the past. Reb Nosson is basically the following scenario: you had an ox that pushed another ox into a pit. So Reb Nosson says it's joint responsibility here. The owner of the ox pays half payment if it's a tam, and then the owner of the pit has to make up the rest. And if it's a muad, they split this. So I'm sorry. If the animal's a tam, they split 1/4, 3/4. 1/4 of the aggressing ox, and 3/4 of the owner of the pit. If, however, the animal is a muad, they split 50-50. So this now over here, it's true that he tripped on the ground and then bumped into your stone, but what's the difference? Why is tripping on the ground different than somebody else's ox pushing a different ox pushing my ox into the pit? It should be the same thing. And true, this is not like the opinion of Rav Nosson. Some have the opposite version of Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar, don't say that if the guy trips over, the guy trips on the ground and don't say that if he trips on the ground and bangs into the rock, he's exempt. Even if he trips on the ground and bumps into a rock, gets hurt by the rock that was owned by somebody, you're still chayav. The opposite of the previous version. And this would be like the opinion of Rav Nosson. Okay, Rabbi Yehudah says if you're mischav and you have intention, you're liable. What exactly does mischav mean, having intention? In other words, the Mishnah says the guy was carrying a barrel, it broke, either the liquid or the shards caused damage. Rabbi Yehudah says you're chayiv if you had intention. What does that mean? Rabba says he was taking the barrel off his shoulder, and that's sort of where it broke. Okay, 1 second. In other words, he was taking the barrel off his shoulder, and then he tripped while that happened, and that caused damage. Evidently, Rav Meir would say that you're chayav, even if the barrel itself sort of dissolved. In other words, the barrel sort of broke on its own. Rav Meir would still say you're chayav, and the question is why. You're right. Even if the handle's in his hand, meaning it sort of cracked, the barrel cracked on its own, it did damage, even though he's completely, we'll see he's an Einitz, but we'll have to see why this is the case.
But who was hired?
The guy, somebody who was carrying a barrel.
The one who's carrying the barrel.
According to Rabbi Yehudah, he sort of tripped as he was lowering the barrel.
That's his fault.
1 second. Let me just make sure that's right. Hold on. Let me double check that. Let's see. For a second. The way I explained it was correct. That so Rabbi Yehudah says that he was lowering the barrel from his shoulder, and he tripped while he was lowering the barrel. And tripping is sort of negligence. You should not be tripping, especially when you're carrying a barrel. And therefore, when it breaks and it shatters, if those shards or water does damage, then you're chayav.
The one who had the barrel.
The one who was carrying the barrel, he's the one who effectively dug a pit. Now, Reb Meir says no. Even if the barrel sort of dissolved on its own, he was not responsible really for the fact that the barrel fell apart. He was like, for example, he was holding the handle, and now he's holding the handle, but the vessel's not attached to it anymore. That's what it means. If it wasn't he was holding the handle. He's still chayav. The Gemara says, "Amai, why is he chayav? Onosu. He's an einus. It's not his fault." The Torah exempts those that who have done things under duress. The Siv is the verse states, don't do anything to the girl. This is referring to a girl who was raped while she was in Arusa. So normally there'd be the potential for capital punishment, but because she was raped, so therefore she's exempt. Okay, and if you'll say, this is only true with regard to capital punishment, with regard to damages, chayev, that you'd be chayev. We learned, a guy's barrel fell down and he didn't remove it. His camel fell down. He didn't stand up the camel. So Rameir says you're chayev for the damage. It's a bar. The rabbis say, Adam. He's exempt from courts, but min shemayim, heaven will exact retribution. Okay, we'll get to the details on that soon. The rabbis agreed to Rameir that if you put the stone, the knife, and the heavy item on top on your roof, and it falls in a regular wind, and it causes damage, in other words, basically in a scenario where you should have realized the outcome, that the wind would blow down your pit into the public area, the rabbis agree they're chayev. Somebody put barrels on his roof so that they should dry out, and a violent, unusual wind came and knocked them down, and they did damage, that you're exempt. So Rameir clearly agrees that if you're an einus, right, it's not your fault, and accidentally, without any intention, you ended up digging a pit. In other words, in this case, the barrels that fell off the roof, you're exempt. So if Rameir says you're holding onto a pot in the public area, and literally now you're only holding onto the handles, and the pot is gone, it's an einus. So what are you supposed to do about it? So why are you chayav? Why do you have to pay? So Elam Rabbayat says, but tarati pligi. There are two debates here: pligi b'shas nefila or pligi la'achar nefila. They're talking about the moment the item fell and after it fell, during the fall and after the fall. Pligi b'shas nefila b'niskal b'shehu. At the time of the fall, they have a debate. Marasavar niskal b'shehu, marasavar niskal lav b'shehu. According to Rabbi Yehudah, tripping and falling down makes you guilty. You should not be tripping. And Rameir says no. It's not uncommon for somebody to trip. Okay, now so therefore, according to Rabbi Yehudah, while the barrel is falling, according to Rabbi Yehudah, while you're falling down after you trip, if you damage something during that event, as the barrel is falling down to shatter, then you'd be chayev, because you are you're guilty of negligence by tripping. And according to Rameir, you would not be chayev, because it's not your fault. However, once it fell down already, and now the question is, are you responsible to clean it up? Okay. Now that it fell down, they have another debate. So now that it fell down and cracked, the guy sort of abandons it. So it's no longer belongs to him. Marsavar mafkin zakov chayev. Marsavar potter. So Reb Meir says after it already fell, you're chayiv. Why? Because it still belongs to you. Go clean it up. And according to Rabbi Yehudah, no, it shattered. It doesn't belong to you anymore. It's the police's responsibility or the roadway, whatever, highway patrol. They should clean it up. And Mafker Zakov is exempt from the damages. Okay, so the Gemara says, Umimai, how do we know this? Because the Mishnah gives two examples. A guy was hit by the water, or he got hit, or he tripped over a shard. It's the same thing. It must be that this is what it means. The water hit somebody as he was falling down. Or he tripped over a shard after the item already broke. So the Gemara says, okay, if the Mishnah is referring to two scenarios, the Brisa presumably is referring to two as well. Okay, so the Brisa that we just saw on the bottom of Chesem base, we said two things fell, right? There was his barrel fell or his camel fell. Okay, the guy's barrel that fell, it could be in either scenario. Either it damaged as it was going down, or it damaged after it already broke. His camel, the animal falls and it dies, and then he says, I'm making the animal ownerless. I'm not dealing with the carcass. Okay, but how is it possible for the animal to have done damage as it was falling down? Sorry. The question is, how is it possible for the guy to be guilty as his camel is falling down? In other words, his camel has a heart attack, basically, and falls down. It's not his fault. So how could it be that the guy's chayiv for his animal damaging things as it falls, and the fall is his responsibility? How are you responsible for your animal falling down in a public area?
Sure.
Yeah, but the camel tripped, not you. So you could say that you're responsible to make sure you don't trip, but you can't say you're responsible to make sure your camel doesn't trip.
No.
How are you supposed to do that? The camel looks where it's going, at least. So Gemara says, what happened was the riverbank overflowed, and he sort of walked it along the riverbank, and obviously shouldn't have been doing that. That's how it fell. So if there was another route, then he's a pesheah. He's guilty, and it's very hard to equate this with nitkal. Nitkal is where he tripped. Over here, this is not tripping. He's guilty for taking the animal through a muddy area. If that's the only choice, then onasu, then he's not at fault at all. So the Gemara says, what happened was he tripped and his animal tripped over him. See, he's responsible for making his animal trip because he should have been careful where he was walking. So according to Rabbi Yehudah, you're exempt. According to Rabbi Yehudah, nitkal peshehu. So the guy who trips is guilty for tripping, and he's guilty for tripping his animal too. So if his animal does damage on the way down, he's chayav. According to Rameir, nitkal lav peshehu. So therefore you'd be exempt. 1 second. Okay. Now on the second debate, we have a debate here between if the guy made his stuff ownerless. So Rabbi Yehudah says you're exempt. Rameir says you're chayav. Gemara says my mischab. In other words, Rabbi Yehudah says if you had intention, then you're chayav. How exactly does the word intention imply that if you make the shards or the carcass ownerless, you're exempt? Where's the implication? In other words, how do we see that Rameir holds that if you make your stuff ownerless, that you'd be exempt from the damages? All Rameir says is if you have intention, you're chayav. You don't have intention, you're potter. What does making your stuff ownerless have to do with intention? How do they relate with each other? So Gemara has a very simple resolution. Amar v'Yosef, the mischaven liskus b'charosis. Rabbi Yehudah is saying as follows: if you intend mischaven, that's the key word. If you have intention to acquire the shards, meaning you're not making the item ownerless, then you're chayav because then it's actually your item. But the implication of that is if you didn't have that intention, you don't have intention of collecting the carcass or the shards, so then you'd be exempt.
I don't have intention. Make a mistake.
One second.
Right.
Okay. Let's continue for another minute or so. Rabbi Elazar Omer, I'm sorry, Rabbi Elazar Omar, Rabbi Elazar says, B'shas nefila machlekes. The debate between Meir and Rabbi Yehudah is as the item is as the animal or the person is going down, or the vessel. Aval acha nefila mai. So the Gemara says, okay, fine. So that's the debate. Rabbi Yehudah says you're chayev. Rabbi Meir says you're potter. Rabbi Yehudah says you're chayev because niskal pashehu, because you tripped over. That's your fault. Therefore you're chayev. Rabbi Meir said, and that's what I mean when Rabbi Yehudah says mischaven, and Rabbi Meir says. No, tripping is not considered pasha. You're exempt on the way down. So Mars says, okay, well, what happens after the way down? After it already breaks up. Everyone holds you're exempt. Rameir clearly says you're chayev. Elamai, it must be divrei kol chayev. Everybody says you're chayev. The rabbis say that after the carcass is on the floor, you're exempt from damage. That was the rabbis in the brisa. Okay, Elamai b'shas nefila, af b'shas nefila. Kamash malakad abaya. Okay, so when Rabbi Elazar says they argue on as the animal's going down, Rabbi Elazar didn't mean to say only in that debate. He means exactly like Abaya. There are two debates. The debate is not only by mafker and zaka, by making your shards ownerless, but it's also when the animal is or the person or the barrel is going down. And the question is tripping considered negligence or not? Exactly like Abaya. Okay. Next Gemara is very similar. Rabbi Yechon says similarly. The debate here is after the animal fell. Aval b'shas nefila mai. 1 second. Yeah, okay, let's just finish this one up. Rabbi Yechon says the debate, same thing like Rabbi Elazar. The debate is after the animal fell. Aval b'shas nefila. I'm sorry. So the debate is when the animal after the item is already broke. That's the debate, and the question is mafkrin zakav. If you make your damages ownerless. Aval b'shas nefila, but at the moment the animal falls, what's the story? Divrei kol potter. Everyone holds you're exempt because tripping is not considered negligence. But midika Rabbi Yechon Kamma loy temas nisir Meir hidam nitkal pashehu mechalder Meir savar mechalder Meir mechayev. Okay, without getting into the specifics here, but Rabbi Meir clearly says that nitkal is pashehu. 1 second. We'll stop here. We'll see this question. Okay.
Have a good Shabbos.
7:30 or 7:45?
7:45.
7:35.